Okay, Nathan, I think if it's good with you, we should get started.
Okay, sure.
All right, yeah. So hello, everyone. Thank you all for showing up, and welcome to another one of the TUBC seminar series. Today, we'll be covering navigation and orienteering. I'm Evan, and Nathan will be helping me present today. So going to the next slide, we'll see what we're covering. So today we're going to cover 4 main topics. The first one's how to read a topographic map. The second one is using a compass. Then there's orienteering, and route planning is the last one. So first, you see here, that's an example of a topographic map, also known as a detailed terrain map. And the key thing about these is, as opposed to like a standard Google map, is it really allows you to get the lay of the land. So those brown lines, both thin and the thick ones, they represent different elevations. And if you look at them and kind of imagine it popping out of the paper, it allows you to visualize the surrounding terrain. And these are best used with a compass to exactly locate yourself in relation to your surroundings and then determine which direction you need to go. So everything on these maps has a purpose, and I'll send it to Nathan and he'll explain the purpose of some of the things you see here.
All right, so now we're going to go over the main features of a topographic map and how you can use it and know how to use it when you're in the backcountry. So some of the important parts of the topographic map mainly are the contour lines, which are basically tell you the differences in elevation of where you're hiking or backpacking. So as you can see here, they have these small the more lightly shaded contour lines, and then the more darkly shaded ones. So those they're gonna have the marked elevation right here and right there, and in this case it's in feet. And then in between you have these intervals, and in this case it's going to be in intervals of 40 feet. So it depends on the topographic map, but it's something good to look at. And then we're going to see how we can read these contour lines to see what the elevation like is at an area of interest. So right here you can see that the contour lines are very close together, and that means that it's going to be a very steep area since there's going to be a rapid change in elevation within this short distance. So it's going to be a high gradient, so you can expect maybe a cliffside or a very steep area right here. And then we're also going to look at the opposite, which is right here. You can see that the contour lines are very spaced out right here. In that case, there's going to be a smaller elevation change in a longer distance. So then in that case, it would be a low gradient. So then in that case, you can expect like a more flatter area, maybe like a little basin valley area right here. So it's gonna be a flatter elevation, probably more easier to travel across as well. And then next, we're going to look at another feature, which is a saddle. So you can see right here, there's like this part where it's kind of like an area between 2 higher areas of elevation. So this would be a saddle, and the importance of a saddle, also known as also known as a pass or mountain pass, is that these can be used as travel routes to get in between 2 different basins, especially if you're traveling in this area like these Sierras, where in many cases the fastest way is to cross over to cross over like a ridge line or an area between 2 basins. So in that case, you want to look for a saddle, and that would make the travel easier. So that's why it'd be important to identify where saddles are, or mountain passes. And then next, we're going to read some what these little numbers or letters mean. So right here, you can see a little marking right there, and it says BM. And this is a benchmark. So a benchmark is a precise marking or precise elevation marking. So these can be used with reference to kind of get an idea of an exact elevation at specific points along a trail, like right here. And then next we have this number. So in this case, this is a Forest Service map, and they divide the maps into little grids, and this number is going to tell you it's a section number. So it any map that you have from the Forest Service divides their areas into different sections, and then this is useful if you're referring to if you're reading a guide and then it refers to like specific section of the forest. So you can use these nut numbers to identify specific areas of where you're backpacking. And then up here, that's another way to identify exactly where you are in the forest or the general areas. This would be a township number. It's basically another way of subdividing the forest into smaller sections so you can know the general area of where you are over in the entire forest. So now Evan will continue with talking about a compass.
Yes, so that on your screen, you can see an example of a compass. I also have one that's pretty similar, although it has a mirror for signaling. But so now we'll go through each of the features. So if Nathan can click through, we'll see the different features. So the first one is the index pointer. So that it's a line that's in line with the direction of travel arrow. And its purpose is as you turn the bezel, you can see exactly which degree is lined up with your direction of travel arrow. So the basic, we'll talk about this in the next slide or two, but the basic premise of using a compass is you put it down in some direction you want to go, then you turn the bezel so that the index pointer is aligned with something that is aligned with the particular heading. And then you rotate yourself for the needle to get into the pointer. So as you can see, that's the bezel. There's a ruler on the side of most compasses. That's important because it allows you to say, measure a distance on the map in inches, then go down to your scale. You'll see that say 2 inches is equal to 5 miles. And then you'll know you're roughly 5 miles away from where you need to be. So then you see the orienteering lines and the needle. The orienteering lines are used to line up with the map. As you can see, that's a clear back there. So you're supposed to turn this bezel until those orienteering lines are aligned with some sort of true north marker. And then you're supposed to rotate yourself until the needle matches up with the orienteering arrow. And then you know that you're pointed in the correct direction. And then the last and maybe most important thing is the declination adjustment. That allows you to adjust for the fact that magnetic north is not exactly the same as true north. And I believe Nathan will be talking a little bit more about that right now.
Right, so now we'll be going a little bit more into magnetic declination, what it is. So basically magnetic declination is basically, it's basically that with the compass, it's the needle, the red part of the needle is actually pointing toward magnetic north due to the Earth's magnetic field, and that is roughly 250 miles away from true north. However, whenever you're using a topo map, you want to all the north marks or the marks on the topo map have they are oriented toward true north. So you want to make sure that whenever you're using a compass and you capture like a bearing, that you account for this magnetic declination. And how you would do this is that in the legend of your topo map, it should indicate the magnetic declination for that area where you're hiking or backpacking. And in that case, you would either want to add or subtract the declination in there. So, and also the declination is going to vary by location. So depending on where you are, it could be a very large declination or like a negligible declination. And something else you want to know is that always try to get up-to-date maps. The magnetic north does change location a little bit over time. So as long as it's maybe just like kind of a relatively recent map, it should be fine. Just don't do something from like, I don't know, like 1940 or something. It could have changed a lot by then. So just try to get recent maps so that they can give you the most accurate magnetic declination as of this time.
Yeah, and just a few more words on declination. One, so I was reading actually there in Florida and like the area near there, Bermuda and whatnot, the magnetic declination is actually 0 degrees. And I was reading that was potentially a cause for some of the mysterious disappearances that have happened in the Bermuda Triangle. It changes because the magnetic North Pole is actually in a different place than the normal North Pole, and it moves around due to the rotation of the Earth's and like convection of magma underneath the surface, because that's what creates the magnetic field, is like lava circulating around the center of the Earth. So it changes over time, and actually scientists theorize that the magnetic poles might swap within the next 10,000 years or so. So if you're in the wilderness when that happens, we can't really help you. So sorry. So on to the next slide then, Nathan. So now we're going to talk about how you take a bearing. So taking a bearing is basically how you point yourself in the direction you need to go. So the first step is to identify your current location on the map, which we'll talk about next. The main way to do that is triangulation. But you might also know where you are. You might be at a benchmark marker. You might be at a lake that you know. So then you identify where you want to go. So ideally, you'll have like a pencil with you, and you can mark that on the map and draw a line between the two. And then you'll line up the compass. That's also what these nice flat edges are for. You can line that up along that line of between where you are and your destination, and point the direction of travel arrow in that direction. Then you'll rotate the bezel until north, or these orienteering lines line up with the map. And then of course you have to adjust for declination. So my compass has a nice little gradient thing here that allows you to see exactly where to put the orienteering lines. And then you will turn holding the compass in the map until the red needle lines up with the red orienteering arrow. So that's called red in the shed. And then if all is right, you're pointed in the direction you need to be traveling. But how do you find your location before if you don't know where you are? So that's the next slide, which is triangulation. And so to do that, you have to look around, and you have to find three things that will A, appear on the map, and B, you can find on the map. So it can't just be like a tall tree, because those don't usually appear on topographic maps. It has to be like a fire lookout tower, or a mountain peak, or a building, although I'm not sure if you'd be encountering buildings in the backcountry. But whatever it is, you need to find three things that are roughly 60 degrees apart from you. So they're on all sides of you. And then you'll use your compass. You'll put a line north with the direction of travel arrow. That's the easiest way I can do it. And then you'll point directly at it. So you'll point the direction of travel arrow at whatever it is. And then you can read where the needle's pointing. And that will be the bearing of that. So then you'll go onto your map. And again, this is why a pencil is helpful when you're doing orienteering, because then you can draw a line from that point in that direction. And then you'll do that 2 more times for all 3 objects. And where they intersect, you'll get hopefully a very small triangle, or even better, a point where they intersect. And that's roughly where you are. So Nathan has an example for us on the next slide.
All right, now we're going to go into an example of what triangulation would look like on a topo map. So here we have the Angeles National Forest, and suppose you're going on a trip to Switzer Falls, which would be right here. So then you park over here, and then you want to maybe this time you're being a little bit more adventurous. So you want to try out a different route and enter in from using a canyoneering route, Little Bear Canyon, and try to approach from downstream. So then you know generally to go up this hill, but then you kind of get lost along the way, and you want to figure out where exactly you are in this area right here, so you can see know which direction it is to enter in the canyon from the top, which is going to be somewhere around here. So first, what you would do in this case would be to just look around in the area and try to identify some notable monuments or landmarks, and then wherever from your vantage point, anything you can see. So like I mentioned, like a mountain or a building. So in this case, let's suppose you can see Hoyt Mountain, which would be right here. And then if you can see this mountain from your vantage point on, let's say this on the slope over here, then you can identify that on your map. So we're going to mark it on the map right here. And then you're going to want to capture a bearing. So you want to orient yourself so that with red in the shed, and then orient it so that you can capture a specific bearing. So it would be a specific degree number, maybe east or west. You want to make sure to capture that bearing, and then once you have that bearing, you want to mark it down, align the compass with using that bearing, and then align it along this point right here, and then with that declination accounted for, draw the uh, bearing line. So in this case, what this means, after you've been able to capture a bearing from your vantage point and then draw that bearing line between the landmark that you identified, is that you're going to be somewhere along this line right here. However, that won't be enough in case you want to know exactly where you are, or more close to where you are. So then in that case, you want to identify at least 2 more monuments. So let's say from your vantage point, you'll be able to see Josephine Peak, which would be right up here. And then you want to also do the same thing, capture a bearing for Josephine Peak from wherever you are, draw the line. And then now you're going to be you're going to have a general, a more accurate idea of where you are. So you can be somewhere here, but then you want to at least take that third bearing so that you can get that triangle that we're looking for in this triangulation method. So then next you can identify a third peak from your vantage point, and then in that case it could be Strawberry Peak, and then draw it on the map, and then take that bearing, and then draw that line, and then now we will have this triangle right here. So in this case, you're going to be somewhere in this general area of the triangle. So this is how you can use triangulation using specific landmarks to identify the general location of where you are. And the ideal thing is to have this triangle as small as possible, so that would mean if it's like if they intersect in this area, you know exactly where you are, and the smaller the triangle is, the more accurate your triangulation was. And you can always do it several times to see how accurate you are in the field. And so in this case, now that we've identified where we are, we can see that we're a little bit to the west of the canyon entrance. So in this case, you would want to move a little bit east, maybe take a bearing, and then try to enter in from the top of this canyon. So this is how you use triangulation to navigate.
And to answer your question, Malia, if you don't know any of the landmarks, then you can still identify that there's 3 relatively prominent peaks. And then if you know roughly where you are, like say you know you're on that slope, you can take a rough bearing, and then you know, say, oh, there must be there's a mountain peak to the west of me. That must be Hoyt Mountain. And then you can take a more specific bearing, and so on and so forth for the other 2. So that's how you can kind of identify a landmark if you don't necessarily know exactly what each landmark looks like.
Got it. Thanks.
All right. So now we're going to go in a little bit more about some other general navigation tips that you can use while out in the backcountry. So first, we're going to have one tip, which is going to be aiming off. So in terms of navigation, what that means is that if you're looking for a specific campsite or trail intersection that you want to get to, sometimes it's a better idea to kind of go purposely go off from it, like a little bit, purposely go like go like away from it, kind of like purposely going like a little bit in the wrong direction, so that will guarantee if you hit a specific line or like a trail, then that would mean to like go a specific direction toward your desired location. So that might be a bit confusing first, but we're going to use this example right here. So suppose that you're on this little mountain area right here, and you want to get to this trail intersection right here. In that case, you may not know exactly where you are, but in this general location, sometimes, so in this case, to aim off, you would kind of take a bearing and try to go toward the right. And then in that case, it will guarantee that once you intersect this little trail right here, it will guarantee that you would know to turn left and get to this intersection. Whereas if you just take a direct bearing, you might hit it left or right, and then you may not know which way to go afterwards. So sometimes it's a better idea to aim off, and then so that you know once you hit this little border right here, this trail, you would know to turn left and you would guarantee to get to this trail intersection. So that's going to be aiming off. And then next we have the handrails, which is basically kind of like a handrail. It's like you can use it as a guide to guide your hiking. So in this map, we could say that this little creek right here is a handrail because as long as you follow it, you will know in a general area where you are on the map. And then a few others, we have trail markers, just pretty obvious, just like always be on the lookout whenever you have a trail intersection to read those markers with like mileage information and distance information. And then another good tip is to, whenever you're at the trailhead, is to take pictures of the map at the beginning of the trailhead where they usually have it like the parking lot somewhere at the trailhead. And then another good idea is whenever you get to important or notable waypoints along the way, like maybe like a river crossing or like a notable rock, it's a good idea to take some pictures of it so you can refer back to it if you're trying to hike back. And then next we have to be aware of river creek confluences. So now we're going to go into this specific diagram here with confluences. So in this case, we would be hiking, suppose we're hiking along a river, and then we're going to be hiking downstream this way. And on the return way, we're going to want to hike back up the same way and back to the trailhead up here. So going downstream, it may not be as notable or obvious or important, since when you're going downstream, you're going to pass by these little creeks that might just kind of flow in there at these confluences here, and they're all heading downstream, so it's not much of a navigation issue. But when you're hiking back upstream, it's going to be it could get confusing because you're going to see them branching off, and then if you don't remember, or you took those pictures of if you didn't remember which way it is, or you forgot to take a waypoint picture, then you may not know which way to go. So always be aware to study these topo maps ahead of time and beware of these confluences, and make sure to map out your way so that when you're traveling back upstream, you don't choose the wrong way, which could be bad. So make sure, be aware of river confluences like this. And then a few more just very general tips, like trail branching, be aware of that, similar to confluences. Be aware if you see any trail branches, take note of that, especially if they're like these in these Y shapes, these forks, kind of like right here, be aware of that. And then another general tip that I recommend using is just to get a good idea of the ecology of the area where you're going. And the way this could be useful just for like a general navigation tip is, if you know like the ecology of where you are, you're going to be able to perhaps get like an elevation estimation just from like looking in your surroundings and seeing where you are. So for example, in like the Sierra Nevada, they're going to have different vegetation types as you increase in elevation. So then, for example, with like the lower elevations, you're going to have like the chaparral, oak savanna types vegetation. And as you go higher up, you're going to see the different tree species changing due to the elevation differences. So just by knowing exactly like the general vegetation type of the area, you can get an idea of the elevation, which could potentially make the triangulation easier if you want to identify where you are, and then you also know generally where your elevation is on the map. And now, finally, we're going to go into a few brief tips about route planning. And this is basically the preparation stage whenever you want to go hiking, and this is before you go out and start going into the backcountry. So always, whenever you want to go out, you always need to plan before you go, especially with navigation. So the first step often, if you want to go search for a specific, if you figure out where you want to hike or where you want to backpack, you want to always search the trail area info for like current conditions, all that stuff. And then whenever you look for trail info, you always want to look at the official agency website. So that would be like the National Park Service or the U.S. Forest Service, since they're going to have the original information for like the current conditions or whether or not something is closed. And so then there's also apps like All Trails that you can use. And while they are good for discovering discovering new trails that you might want to hike, or maybe getting some reviews of how interesting the hike was for other people, they're not reliable it's not a reliable source for planning your route or something like that, because the GPS tracks that they provide, they are crowdsourced. So basically what that means is that they have the users submit their GPS tracks to the site, and those can get approved for what shows up in the trail catalog for a specific area. So but the problem with that is that sometimes these tracks can just be someone's route off trail. You may not know if the trail, it could like lead you to like a dangerous area or somewhere off trail. So you want to avoid relying on these crowdsourced GPS tracks, and make sure that you look at the official agency websites first. And then again, with all trails, they also have like some closure information, but again, that can be inaccurate. So always look at the official agency websites when you're planning. And then another good tip to good application to use with route planning is Google Earth, because in case you're like me, who sometimes may not enjoy reading all those topo lines, at least when planning, you can Google Earth lets you scroll around and then like kind of like scroll around the area and then make it in a 3D, so you can see like the mountains visually. And then this can give you an idea of what the elevation is and generally what the terrain of the area is, so you can maybe plan out a route for the area. And then when you're planning out a route, it's always a good idea to create waypoints and then to kind of lay out your potential route when you're traveling. And then in this case, you might be importing or using these type of files. So this would be GPX, which would be the GPS exchange format, which is used for a lot of waypoints or like marking trail paths. Then there's also KML files, which is a keyhole markup language, and that's used often for displaying specific waypoints on applications like Google Earth. These can be useful when you want to map out a route or identify specific points like campsites. And then there's also handheld navigation devices that you can use, like the Garmin devices, other than like the normal topo map or like your phone GPS. And then whenever you want to go out and actually hike, make sure to, especially if you're relying or using at least your phone for a bit, so for some of the navigation, is to download these maps, especially for no cell service areas where afterwards, if you get there, you won't be able to download anything. So a few sites where you can download or print maps, I would say, are the Forest Service. They provide good topographic maps for all the national forests, and various, and they're but they're only forest specific. So these just for the national forest. And then CalTopo is another site that I enjoy using, and those have a variety of different maps that you can print, and they also have some good features like recent satellite imagery for planning if you want to print that as well. And they also have slope angle shading, which is good for getting another way to get a good idea of the terrain, or like how steep or flat the terrain is. And then a few other sites, there's like Avenza, like this will allow you to download the first 3 maps free. You can download geo PDFs, and which are georeference maps. And these maps, once you download them, they're automatically georeferenced. So this, once you download them to like a site like Avenza, they're going to be able to identify where you are on that topo map instead of you having to build it yourself. Then Gaia GPS is another application that's useful in terms of using your phone for navigation or your phone GPS. These allow you to do that tip I mentioned, where you can take pictures of waypoints and then add them, reference them to a specific area on the map. So this would be a good application for that. However, even if you are using your phone GPS for navigation, always bring paper map and compass, because those are basically the #1 for navigation. These you should always, even if you're using phone GPS for your main navigation, always have these for backup, because you never know if you have a problem, like you could drop your phone or break it, and then you won't have a phone GPS. And these will always work. And then this will basically always bring paper map and compass. So, and yep, that's it for today's presentation. Any questions?
Sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out when you were talking about bearings. Can you just quickly explain how to take a bearing again?
Yeah, so basically, so what you'll do is you'll point yourself and the compass at some object, some landmark that you're looking to assess. And then you'll rotate the bezel until the needle goes into the shed, they call it. And then, oh, sorry, that's to take a bearing in terms of like triangulation. To go to a direction, you're going to put the compass on the map, aligned with the direction you're supposed to travel on the map, and then you'll rotate the compass to line up with that bearing, so that these lines down here point north on the map. You can't see them very well. There's very thin lines against the compass, and then you'll rotate your entire self until the needle lines up. So red would be in the shed, as they say. So then you're pointing in the direction you're supposed to go.
And we'll also we have some videos in the slides. So after the end of the presentation, we'll share out the slides. And there's some videos on the last slide, and you can watch them. They're from REI, and they provide a good brief explanation of basically the methods we described with like bearings and triangulation, and they do it specifically on the map and draw out examples. So those would be good references other than the presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
How often do you guys get lost?
Every trip. Multiple times.
I'm like terrible at directions, and I'm like looking at this stuff. I feel a little bit overwhelmed. I'm like, I don't know how to use all of this stuff. So like, what would be like 1 or 2 recommendations you would have for like someone like me who's just terrible at directions, like on the trail? Like,
I would say the key thing is planning ahead. So not just getting there and like maybe looking at Google Maps or All Trails a bit beforehand and saying, oh, well, we're going to follow this trail. It's roughly this way. Like we know where to go. You definitely should have your topographic maps printed out and ready and not study them, but like review them several times before your trip. So like, you know what the trail's supposed to look like, you know roughly what the land will look like, you know that there's like a trail junction here, you go left, a trail junction there, you go right. And then you kind of have your rough directions. You know where campsites are, not just the one you're going to, but also ones you might pass on the trail, for example. Also, these maps, they don't completely identify, like, for example, water sources, but sometimes you can see like streams and springs, but they don't identify everything. And they're not exact. So if it just rained, there might be a stream that's barely marked on the map might actually be like quite substantial. So that's also something to think about. But definitely the biggest thing, if you can get easily lost, is plan ahead, know where you're going. And I love the like GeoPDFs. They're really a lifesaver when you're in the wilderness, especially like if you bring like a phone charger with you.
Yeah. Okay. What if you're on the trail or like you're camping in some spot? Because I mean, I'm just so bad at directions. Like I'll park offsite somewhere like off the trail, and then I'll be like, shit, like I can't find the trail. Like do you have any suggestions of like how to re-find the trail? Or I mean, it would obviously depend, but I was just wondering if there was any things in general that you guys found were helpful.
I mean, I would say maybe like leave some sort of markers to know where you came from. So like oftentimes, like if there's a trail junction, if the trail path is uncertain, oftentimes you'll see people make like little piles of rocks to know where they're supposed to go. So if you're having trouble, if the land and the land usually looks pretty similar, I'd suggest maybe doing something like that.
Got it.
Making a little arrow with rocks or something. And Simon, how would you recommend practicing these things to be confident when it matters? Well, if we were in person, this would be the time for us to go out, say in front of Royce, and do a little orienteering exercise. Unfortunately, we can't really do that. So I would say, just like on any shorter hikes you do, maybe, I don't know, walking around your neighborhood or whatever, I would say bring your compass and practice like taking bearings on things. They have topographic maps, not just for national forests and national parks. They have topographic maps for most places that you can find. And I would say, if you're looking to bone up on your skills, take out your compass and just, when you're walking around somewhere, practice taking a bearing on some landmark that you see. Practice orienteering yourself to a mountain or a campsite or something. Any
Yeah,
other
Evan?
suggestions, Nathan?
Evan mentions some really good points about the planning ahead part. So yeah, that's basically what I do. Also do every time in order to avoid getting lost, especially for like some cross country routes, or some not some like off trail parts, like some canyoneering routes, is to make sure to study the topography ahead of time, so that when you get there, you're not like fumbling around with like the topo map or like Google Maps. Maybe there's no service, and trying to figure out it then. And specifically, I personally enjoy using Google Satellite with like Google Earth specifically, since those can actually show actual features on the maps. So like sometimes like the topo map itself, they're going to give you like a general terrain profile, but then especially with like canyons, it could be like a very steep crevice area. And then with Google Satellite, they provide like the images. If you like study them carefully, you can tell if there's like any specific landmarks or like specific areas and steep areas in topography, like very narrow slot canyons that you might run across and then you might miss. So then the main thing is always to plan ahead and look at those maps. And then mainly I would recommend satellite, since those basically show all the landmark features about what it would look like in person when you're at that location.
Cool. Any other questions before we wrap up? No? Okay. So yeah, so if you're looking to review these slides or see the videos from REI that Nathan put in this presentation, we'll share it to the Slack right away once we're done, once we wrap up here. But thank you all for coming out. We hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully when things start getting back to normal, we can go on some trips as a group.
Thank you guys so
Thanks, guys.
much.
Good job,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Ew.
So
Nathan, do you want to share that the slides to the Slack then?
Oh yeah.
Great
sure.
work, by the way. Thank you.
All right, cool. Did you get the recording?
Yes.